This is Vladimir Dragonheart Rachmaninoff.
And Tim.
Of the hit music group Blanc. And you're listening to 91.5 WPRK, Winter Park, Florida.
Hey, 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 what a beautiful day. 91.5 WPRK. 91.5 FM.
They Might Be Giants on WPRK, Winter Park, Florida. You're listening to A Certain Degree. Actually, you're not listening to A Certain Degree. This is a new show that I'm trying out this week. I've got a very special guest, very patient and special guest, Miller John. Thank you so much for being here today.
So today we're going to talk about obscure albums.
Yes. So we are going to do something called what I'm calling Odd Numbers, which is the name of the show. And so each of us came with 5 songs and 5 obscure albums. This was a topic that you wanted to cover. So, Miller, you've been on a few times.
Yeah, I have, and this is the first time for this specific formula of the show, so I'm very interested to be the kind of lab rat, as it were.
The guinea pig, of course. Everybody does. Who doesn't like to be a lab rat / guinea pig? So that was the first song that I chose specifically for the show. It's They Might Be Giants has been around since the 80s. They started out as a sort of art band, art installation type of band, avant-garde sort of thing. You could actually at one point call in and they would record a song on an answering machine. So that's how you heard some of their new music for a while. But that one is a later one. I think it was late 90s, early 2000s before they started getting into really their kid Disney phase of things. And it's a song that really helps me wake up in the morning. Even though if you listen to the lyrics, it's a little disturbing. Like it's about a person who is thinking that somebody has stolen their medication, even though it's just Advil, and is seeing things and is maybe having a little bit of a breakdown, which I think we all feel like sometimes, like somebody's moving my stuff around and I don't know about it.
Isn't that the Malcolm in the Middle soundtrack?
That is not.
That is not?
No, that's You're Not the Boss of Me.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
It's another good They Might Be Giant song.
That is. They do have a lot of good songs. So that's one that I wanted to play this morning. And so that was my first song. And so what we have now is your first album. And so before we get into it, though, obscure albums. What do you consider an obscure album?
So it could be obscure in terms of just nobody knows about it.
Okay.
And you like it and it's really good. Or it could be obscure in terms of the sound, which is the least important part. We don't want just really popular albums that sound weird, because that's not really that obscure. It has like an obscure sound, but it's not actually. And then there's just albums that are so weird and maybe a couple people know about it, but it's just, you got to talk about it. So the first one I want to talk about is David Bowie's very first self-titled record. Now, the reason I consider this obscure, because David Bowie is not obscure. He's one of the most popular songwriters of all time. He's
right,
one of the best
everybody
ones.
knows him, yeah.
Yeah. But this album, it's obscure because, mainly because there hasn't been a CD reissue in the USA for 20 years. The one I got from a used record shop, and it was like $5. It came out 20 years ago.
CD, and not vinyl. Okay.
Vinyl, there was actually a reissue on Record Store Day, which it was basically, you got 2 copies of the album. One was on blue, one was on red. One was in mono, one was in stereo, which is not really worth it because the album is not very good. This is my least favorite album that we will be talking about, and it's probably the most popular.
How is it the most popular?
Well, I mean...
Does it have a lot of the hits?
No, it doesn't have any hits, pretty much, but it's David Bowie, so people are gonna know about it.
Oh, most popular out of the 5 that you're talking about today.
Yeah.
I gotcha. So what is it about? I mean, can you hear when you listen to it, and you're a big Bowie fan?
Yeah.
So when you listen to his later stuff, does this one sort of, you can kind of tell the direction that he's going? Does it really set him up for the later, even the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th albums?
Well...
Or is it a completely different sound?
I don't think it's completely different sound. There's certainly... he tries to go for a very Beach Boys, Beatles type songwriter vibe, like the psychedelic Baroque pop of that era. This was 1967, so he was 20 years old. But I think
And he had to change his name, right?
No, he was under David Bowie for this one.
No, because his name is David Jones.
Oh yeah, so yeah, he changed his name. And this album, the main thing is the lyrical content, because the lyrical content is easily the weirdest thing about this album. It is, for some reason, it deals a lot in childhood, like imagination, kids living in imagination land, and then it kind of twists that on its head for the last couple songs. But the first song is about a man-child who can't grow up, still lives with his parents, reads comic books, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Pretty happy, disposable, instrumental. A lot of the stuff is a bit just kind of disposable 60s pop rock. And then We Are Hungry Men, that's a song. It's this really dystopian tune about population control, and it talks about mass abortion and infertility.
Ooh.
Yeah, and there's this German man, which I guess is supposed to be like a kind of
A Nazi stand-in? Yeah.
And he's talking about if you breathe more than your allotted amount of air, you will be slaughtered. It's just a really
So it goes from very
strange-
light to very dark.
And right before that song, it's what's it called? There Is a Happy Land. It's just a very overly cutesy song about kids playing in imagination land, and it's kind of weird. It just the shifts. It goes very strange from one topic to another, and the last song is just so there's no instrumental. It's just the background is rain, and David Bowie is like a nasally murderer. He's sneezing every once in a while, and he's talking to a gravedigger. It's called Please Mr. Gravedigger, and he talks to the gravedigger about murdering a 10-year-old and then murdering the gravedigger.
Oh.
And
Consistent.
it just kind of ends on a very disturbed, creepy, haunted note. And I just think it may not be a good listen, but it's certainly an interesting listen. Even when this is the worst David Bowie record I've heard, and it still, kind of keeps you on your toes.
That's very interesting. So do you feel like he was exploring a little bit? He was testing out sort of his boundaries?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he recorded a lot of these songs on different record labels, so maybe some of them got him kicked off. I wouldn't know. But yeah, it's just a really strange album. And he hated this album. He never wanted it reissued. That's why you still can't get it new on CD today. Because his next album, Space Oddity, it was originally called David Bowie, so it was his second self-titled record. So he had two self-titled records for a while.
I see. So maybe he made this one, the first one, and he was like, this isn't me at all. This doesn't represent me. He found his voice afterwards.
Yeah.
And that became an embarrassment for him.
Because basically after Space Oddity, it's just up from there. So Space Oddity, then Man Who Sold the World, then Hunky Dory, then Ziggy Stardust, then Aladdin Sane, and then all the stuff he did through the 70s and 80s.
So I've got an artist for one of my obscure albums that, basically had an album coming out every year. You don't really see that from artists anymore, right? Like David Bowie was prodigious in the 70s, right? He came out with a bunch of stuff in late 60s, through the 70s. One of my artists, one of the albums that I have coming up, it from 77 or 78 through 89 basically had an album come out every year. You don't really see that anymore with a lot of artists, do you?
Yeah, kind of.
On the hip hop side.
On the hip hop side, definitely. On the rock side, well, it depends, because David Bowie, he had an album coming out, sometimes multiple albums coming out. Like, I'm pretty sure Aladdin Sane and Ziggy Stardust came out within the
same
span of a year.
Yeah.
And he had that up till, I think I counted it was like late 80s. So he had through like 69 or 70 through all the way up to the late 80s. And hip hop artists, especially, they make a lot of, like Rockhampton, Kanye West. Well, he doesn't make an album every year, but he makes huge albums. And if he doesn't make huge albums, then he makes multiple albums and that kind of stuff.
That's what I want to do. If I can't make it, if this radio show isn't huge, I'm going to make multiple shows.
Yeah, I really do think that multiple albums within the span of a couple years or just within a year, that's like a new trend for
You
a lot
think?
of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
or it's just make your album super long or super short. That's one of the other things.
But I guess I'm thinking of the bigger pop artists. They don't typically, Kanye West being the exception to that, but I'm trying to think of the bigger bands anymore. Like, I don't even know who that is.
Weekend?
But, yeah, or Taylor Swift, if you go super poppy. They're not necessarily coming out with an album every year. They do an album, and it's this big event, and then they go on a tour for 16 months, and then they recover, and then a year and a half later, you get a new album.
Yeah, it really just depends on the band. 'Cause
Yeah.
There's a lot of bands doing much more prolific stuff, and there's a lot more bands doing just, they wait like 6 years. Fleet Foxes they just waited 6 years to put out another album.
Right.
Which was very good. It was worth the wait.
Okay, so going back, David Bowie, self-titled, first album, would you recommend it to people?
If you're a David Bowie fan and you want to see where he came from, and if you just want to listen to an interesting album, because this album is very interesting, but it's not very good.
So when you say interesting, like, you're not going to necessarily put this on a mixtape, put any of the songs on a mixtape, unless you're doing a mixtape about dystopian futures.
Yeah. There's a lot of obscure albums that aren't necessarily good to listen to, but they are, it makes you think.
Oh.
It makes your noggin.
It makes your noggin...
It makes your noggin...
Go.
Nog.
Yes, that's a good call. All right, well, thank you for that. We're going to start out with your first song. What are we going to listen to here, Miller?
So this band took a lot of searching, because I saw it on a Rate Your Music list, and it's called Propose, except it's spelled PR0, P0SE.
Okay.
So it's spelled with zeros. And it's an EP called Propose, spelled the same way. And the song is called Propose, featuring, oh shoot, I got to get the feature right.
I like how they're giving away their password as well. I'm 90% sure that's also their password, except the E is probably a 3 in their password.
Featuring Choo
Bacabra.
Choo
Baka.
Gatagoto.
Choo
Choo Choo Gatagoto.
Choo Choo Gatagoto.
Yeah, the song name is in Japanese, but I translated it and it said propose, so it's just their stuff.
Say his name one more time, because that's an amazing name.
Choo Choo Gatagoto. I got to go. Let's got to go to some music.
I got to go to some music. This is Propose on WPRK, Winter Park, Florida. You're listening to Odd Numbers.